Hi, I'm Philip Carr-Gomm, and this is This Magical Life, your guide to the intersection of psychology, spirituality, and wisdom. Hello, everyone. I'm with Ruby Reed, and Ruby, I've got to know over the last few years, is involved in a really interesting venture. And I thought it would be great just to ask her about this venture because I know that you'd find it very interesting. So Ruby, tell me about Advaya. How did this initiative that you've been involved in start? What's the story?
So Advaya was started by my sister and I almost 10 years ago, September 2015,
Right.
in the form of a big event. And for 5 years, we ran different events exploring consciousness, spirituality, activism, how we could live better in the world and the better in the context we find ourselves. We hosted 200 events over that time. And it
Wow.
was
So stop there, because straight away that you've said two incredible things. One is 20. Can I ask, how old were you when you were in 2015?
25,
You were
and my
25.
sister was 22.
22 and 25, and you started these events in London. Yeah, in London. And the topic is so interesting: the activism, spirituality, and the environment, ecology, those sort of coming
Mm-hmm.
together. And 200 events in those 5 years.
They were quite large. The main purpose was for them to be multidisciplinary. So it was getting people through the door who were interested in spirituality to learn about ecology and to learn about the interconnected relationships between these different things that we felt were so important in our world and that were so siloed at the time. So you had the wellness movement or the activism movement or the ecology movement that was so inward looking, and there was very little dialogue about the interconnectedness.
That's absolutely right. I remember when I first came across your work. I think I saw it in a British Pilgrimage Trust flyer or something,
Mm.
and I remember thinking, "Gosh, that's great!" Because as you say, it's very easy for these things to become siloed. People involved in the spiritual world, and then those silos get sub-siloed, don't they? You've
Mm.
got the spiritual, and you've got sort of the New Age lot, the pagan lot. So how fabulous! And then what happened after doing those 200 events?
we COVID happened, so we
Yeah,
shifted online. But
yeah.
we continue doing exactly the same thing, but just in an online format. So we moved from having multidisciplinary events in person to online containers, but they followed a similar logic, and were very aligned with the same mission and vision, which was all about reimagination, reawakening, uh, thinking about how we can tell different stories about the world that we live in to allow us to kind of really fulfill a different purpose within the place we find ourselves. I think there was a lot of feeling of apathy at the time around in our friendship circles. There was a lot of going home and watching David Attenborough on the computer, but not feeling that we could really do very much in the world apart from understanding the problems. So we really wanted to build community. As I
Mm.
said, originally it was all in person, and then it moved into the online space, and it was really building community, helping people to understand that they're not alone in their questions about
Mm.
things, and that there is this very vibrant and living ecosystem out there of people who are thinking similarly and who are asking similar questions and who are coming to very interesting places with that. So we kind of went on this big journey, and we started off. We were both from this yoga and activism world, and a lot of our early events were very much around this. They were around Vedic philosophy, and then we moved into a much more concrete way, exploring things like alternative economies and reimagining our economic systems, through to mythology and different mythologies as ways that can help us to understand this problems that we find ourselves in, and different archetypal solutions, all the way through to different approaches to well-being, such as dream work and dream practices.
Yeah.
So they were very, very multidisciplinary, but all along the same guiding principle.
Same guiding principle, which is really about how to make the world a better place, and the activist idea of improving the world and improving ourselves.
I think it's about imbuing our lives with what is important to us.
Yeah.
people often say that we care about the environment, or we care about health, or we care about social justice, but it's hard to bring that into our daily lives because it can feel so opposite to the way that we actually live. But it doesn't need to be that way, I don't think. It can be simple things such as our orientation towards nature, how we understand our place within the natural world, how we come to live in alignment with seasons, and how we come together with our friends, families, and communities in celebration of all of these things.
Yes, yes, exactly. And that's why I was so happy when you invited me to create a course for Advaya. I was really happy because I felt that what you were doing was so, not only so good, but also on the sort of cutting edge of. I mean, it sounds very grandiose, doesn't it, when you talk about the cutting edge or sort of leading edge of sort of consciousness and all the rest of it. But and I don't mean it in that way. But I mean so absolutely what's needed. Let's put it that way, and in tune with the spirit of the times. And the challenge for me, for instance, in being interested in Druidry and working in the Druid tradition, is you've got this very old inspiration from way back in the past, and then you look at the world today and you see, well, the world faces so many problems, and isn't this just hopelessly anachronistic and all the rest of it, and shouldn't you be working a different way? And yet this perspective that you've talked about enables us to see how no, we can have these sort of multiple perspectives that really help us to grow and change.
Something I love about Druidry is this enlivening of the world that we're part of. And it's not only part of Druidry, but part of most Indigenous traditions, and also mystical lines within like monotheistic religions as well. And this is something that's been very important to us since the beginning of our work, is enlivenment of ourselves, because through enlivening ourselves we can better participate in the world, but also the enlivenment of the world that we're part of, the nature that we engage with, the land that we find ourselves in, the homes that we create, and how can we bring this living energy, this creative, vital energy into play. There's this idea that I loved so much, which was this idea of like a cosmological idea of the beginning of time from the ancient Greeks, from Hesiod. He wrote about it. It was chaos, Gaia, and Eros. So chaos was this, it wasn't just chaos as in disorder, but the vacuum, a vacuum out of which all potential could arise. And chaos exists only in relationship with Gaia and Eros. So Gaia is obviously matter, Gaia the Mother Earth archetype, and then Eros, dynamic energy potential, so creative potentials within and movements. So through that Eros, Gaia, and chaos comes into being the life that we're in. And I think often about this animating life force and this triad of which we can all be part of.
Fantastic, fantastic. What does Advaya mean, by the way?
It means, it's from the Vedic root for non-duality,
Right.
Advaita, which was, like I mentioned before, my sister and I were very deep in like a yoga practice and Vedic philosophy since we were young, since we were teenagers, and this was at the very root of our worldview at the time, was exploring non-dual perspectives, and also the idea of like dharma and purpose and the role that an individual plays in the world based on the context that they're born in.
Yeah, fantastic. And so phase one of Advaya, these five years of, was it about 5 years? Yes, about 5 or 6 years of in-person events, 200 events and so on, bringing people together physically. And now you've had another 5 years of developing this online community and a tremendous array of courses. I mean, wonderful courses, and bringing together many teachers and many inspiring people. Is there a third phase developing? Do you have a vision for the future for Advaya?
I would love to start to bring in person back to our work. Nothing can replace people coming together in a location with a dedicated intention of and a reason for being there. We're also in the process of relaunching everything with a proper consecrated online space for people to be together, because before everything was very just related to the courses and we built community, but it was through each of the individual activities that we did. So now everything is going to be housed together in one kind of Advaya home, and through there we'll be running all of our programs as well as all of our different in-person activities when they come.
So you are going to have in-person activities again?
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you have had this sort of Advaya stage at the
Mm-hmm.
Medicine Festival, haven't you? Where
Yeah,
we've
this was such a joy. Since
yeah
2019, so pretty much since we stopped our events, we started to do the festival. Because the festival first year was with the first year of COVID, and it was this little break in regulation where we had special approval to go ahead with the festival in 2020, and then this is the first year we've had off. So 2020 to 2025, we had the Advaya talk stage there, which was such a joy,
mm,
bringing together all of the leading figures and voices and visionaries, really at, like you said, the cutting edge of how we can live differently, and bringing in ancestral spirituality and traditional worldviews together with new outlooks on the issues of our time.
yeah yeah fantastic. Well, I'd urge anyone to have a look at the Advaya program because there's such richness there. And you've developed a format, you've developed a way of presenting the material that's very easy to drop into. And I know the temptation in this kind of internet age is for us to all become dilettantes, where we sort of drop in and just pick and choose and smorgasbord things. But there's a way in which the material is so rich that it's that yeah, I think you will stay. You drop in, and then this is what I've found in dropping into the courses, that you stick around because it's so interesting.
Exactly what we wanted to do, Philip, is there's so much sampling always, little
Mm,
tastings of things. And we do provide that in a way, but we really try and go to a level of depth. So
mm.
even though there are so many different pathways and ways to engage, whether it's through exploring concepts of love or forest guardianship or water, you can there's a really strong sense of this narrative of interconnectedness and enlivenment that goes through the whole thing. So even though you're dabbling, you're also not, and all of the courses themselves go very deep. So
Yeah, I really sense that in the material that you're presenting.
mm.
Yeah.
I was always so inspired by your work, Philip, with your work around different ancestral traditions within the British Isles, and your
Mm.
work with Obod and the different books that you've written. And you must have been working for many decades now. And I wonder about how you find this time that we're in relation to the years that you've been working, and what you're particularly excited by, or how you feel the climate has changed or the audience has changed.
Yes, that's really interesting because I started presenting this material, talking about Druidry and so on, about probably 40 years ago. And of course, the world has changed enormously since then. And at the beginning, for a number of years, so this would be from I suppose the 1990s or late 80s. I think the first book came out in 88 or something like that. It felt as if I was having to explain to people that there was this incredibly rich ancestral lore that we had in these lands, because my generation, in from the sort of the 60s and 70s generation, we had all turned to the east. We were looking to India for our inspiration, really. And then a chap called John Michel came out with a book called A View Over Atlantis, which talked about the sort of traditions in these lands and ley lines and so on. And so that had quite a cult following. So people were starting to switch onto it, but not in a great way. And so it felt as if what I was doing was telling people about there's a richness that lay beneath their feet, and about Druidry and so on. Then then what happened around that time? It was really the beginnings of the ecological crisis in the 80s. That was when Yosemite, there was a big fire in the Yosemite National Park, and Peter Gabriel started his world music initiatives and so on, real world. And then what happened really, I think, was the 9/11, the opening of the 21st century. And pretty early on, there was this sense of, oh no, it's not going to be uh, as great as we thought. And there was a lot of sense of doom and threat and anxiety that we still have today. And of course, now we have it It's a sort of ongoing situation that's gradually been ramping up, but it actually started 25 years ago at one level with 9/11. But it's for people who are more switched on. It started back in the 70s with the sort of Club of Rome report and people being aware of environmental catastrophe. But very early on, the one thing I learned, I did follow a guru for a while, a Bulgarian guru in the 1980s and 70s, who kept talking about the disasters that were due to come. And I noticed that the people around me were completely disempowered by that. People weren't painting their houses, people weren't going to university because they said it's all going to turn to custard, so there's no point. And that was 40 something years ago. So I've seen how that approach is really so unhelpful, just to scare people to death. But there was this definite shift in the beginning of the 21st century. I'm just trying to scan this period of time that you're talking about. And I suppose the biggest thing for me is when I was a kid and I became interested in Druidry and the sort of traditions here, there was it was a very minority interest. It was on the fringe of the fringe. The big thing was New Age spirituality that was developing, a sort of generalized New Age sort of culture. And then on the edge of that was paganism, and on the edge of the sort of neo-pagan revival was Druidry. And what I've seen essentially over the last, 40 years is this drift becoming more and more, not mainstream, but more, just more. We have 30,000 members in the order. When I joined, there were a dozen. There were a dozen people, and now there are 30,000. So that sort of shows the difference, really. The big shift for me was when I trained in psychotherapy, and particularly in psychosynthesis, and I was able to sort of illuminate my understanding, inform my sense of what an ancestral tradition can do for us today with an understanding of psychology. And the interest just continues to grow. And then, of course, what happened is the sort of shift, the generational shift was a sort of shift where everybody started facing, instead of facing east, looking towards India, everybody started looking towards South America instead. And you got the sort of psychedelic renaissance and this whole interest in indigenous culture from the Americas. And whilst there's a tremendous value in that, I think, again, the risk is that we miss what's beneath our feet. And there's this extraordinary amount of indigenous, or whatever you want to call it, tradition in these lands, this part of the world, that has a lot to teach us. And it's lovely to see really a new generation of people, to see young people really getting switched on by it and finding it's a way of connecting to a sense of heritage, but not in a kind of how can I say it, in a sort of nationalistic way or chauvinistic way, but in a sense of being inspired by the land beneath them and coming to feel at home in these lands. And yeah.
This is one of the things that really I find so important about this excavation of traditional wisdoms in Europe, mostly, where so much of this history has been forgotten and suppressed, and the history of the colonizer, the conqueror, is the history that we learn about, and is also the identity that most people identify with because of also the continued nature of globalization, and how harmful that is to other identities that Europeans can embody based on this real recognition and celebration of millennia old and held traditions that have existed, that were in harmony with land, in harmony with other peoples, in harmony with the spirit world. And something that is so important, I think, is recognizing that it has been a consistent part of our cultures, even if it was forgotten and even if it hasn't been written down. It's been continued and passed on and is part of the genetics of the individual much longer than the narrative of the colonizer, and much longer than these other ways of being. And I think often, like, and you'll say this as a psychologist, there's this, or Riane Eisler, for example, she talks a lot about domination-based systems and partnership-based systems. And I think this is something that's very useful to look at when we're thinking about society and culture and history and tradition. And she talks about the spectrum It's not about left versus right or north versus south. It's a spectrum between domination and partnership. And she talks a lot about traditional wisdom systems and social structures that were based on themes of partnership versus those of domination. So, for example, people often have this idealistic view of paganism as being one of partnership. It was often based on domination. Romans, for example, imperial Rome, the greatest conquerors of all time, and but also pagans. So I think what's actually interesting here is to think about this worldview of partnership, of collaboration, not only among other humans, but in an interdimensional way with nature, with land, and with the spirit world.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Which is what I see you embodying in Advaya, actually, is where, I mean, some of the
And what
core...
I see it being embodied in the Druid world and in the work that you're doing too.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's true. We launched an initiative called the Druid Hearth about, well, it was launched a year ago. We had our anniversary a few days ago, actually. So it was launched a year ago. And it brings together, it's an online platform that has over 100 special interest groups. It has live Zoom feeds into it where we can do workshops and presentations and so on. It has sort of journals in 6 languages. It has a directory to over 300 groups and so on, and lots more as well. And it can only exist as a partnership. No one person is really in charge of it. I mean, obviously, we sort of coordinate it at a sort of tech level and at administrative level, but really it exists because thousands of people who are in it are participating wholeheartedly in it and working in partnership together. And yes, it is, and it's incredibly what's the word inspiring and supportive when we see such the systems of domination causing such havoc in the world today and such suffering, to sense, the other side of the coin, this incredible power of partnership, which that chap who wrote the was it Blessed Unrest, who talked about all the positive initiatives that are taking place on the earth, and Rosalind Watts, who talks about the way in which she uses the analogy of the fires that spread through the forest, and you have this regeneration that occurs, the super blooming that occurs after the fires, and so I see this work of one that is really rooted in the depths, in a way that the systems of domination aren't actually, and that they seem to be so powerful, and that obviously at some level they are, and yet they cannot survive forever because they're not rooted in the very depths of the endeavor, which is, I believe, a sort of cosmic endeavor of evolution from a sort of cosmic and spiritual perspective.
Yeah, I like the cosmic angle, cosmic evolution.
Yeah, I when I tune into what's going on, I suppose, in the wider sense, I get this sense of, despite all the suffering and the difficulty and the threats, there is an evolution playing out and developing that is divine. There is a divine evolution that's occurring, and that is the sort of motive power in the universe. And we just need to align ourselves with that, really.
Yeah, I guess this is this time-old thing of surrender, but
Mm.
also about upholding one's values within the same mouthful. Because it's not
Exactly.
about surrendering and dissociating; it's surrendering and
Yeah,
continuing to participate.
which is why the emphasis on activism is so good, because it's not a passive surrender. It's a kind of active surrendering to the wider story. Well, thank you, Ruby.
Thank you so much, Philip.
Be sure to subscribe, share, and join me next time for more inspiration. The spirit deep within the land and the spirits of the ancestors are calling to us. All across the varied landscapes of the British Isles, Ireland and Brittany, the wisdom of the Druids flows to us like an ancient river, shaping our connection to nature, spirit, and story. Let us step into a tradition that honors the land, the elements, and the unseen forces that weave through every aspect of our lives. My name is Philip Carr-Gomm. I'm a druid, a psychotherapist, and an author. My work bridges the worlds of psychology and spirituality, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to my upcoming course on Advaya, ancestral law and nature spirituality. Through 6 immersive sessions, we'll explore the history and practice of druidry, uncovering the magic of folklore and myth, of plant, tree, and animal lore, of ancient stories, and of the mystical Ogham language. We'll walk the 8-fold wheel of the year and experience the teachings of Bard, Ovate, and Druid. With guided meditations, storytelling, and live Q&A sessions, the course is both a journey into the past, but more importantly, a practice for the present, awakening your intuition, creativity, and connection to the natural world. This is more than just learning. It's a call to remember, to rekindle an ancient bond with the earth and the wisdom of those who came before us. It's a call to step into the path of the Druids. If you feel ready to accept this call, then I warmly invite you to join me in Ancestral Law, Nature, Spirituality, only on Advaya.